This is Bone Chillers to disturb your dreams. Dare to join us? Click subscribe, ring the bell. But remember, we cannot guarantee your safety from the nightmares that await. Prepare to be thrilled, chilled, and filled with a sense of dread you'll find nowhere else. Welcome to the darkness. We've been waiting.
The house that knows you. Lucy stood on the overgrown lawn, clutching the keys to her parents' house with a mix of dread and determination. The old Victorian stood before her, its once white paint now a peeling grey, as if the house itself had decided to mourn the loss of her parents, who had died suddenly just a month ago in what the coroner called a freak accident, a gas leak. She shivered despite the summer heat, a chill that seemed to seep from the very bones of the house. Her task was simple: get the house ready to sell and leave. But as Lucy stepped inside, the door creaked ominously, closing behind her with a soft click that resonated through the silent rooms. The air was stale, heavy with the scent of dust and something else, something sweet and cloying that reminded her of her mother's perfume. The hallway stretched out before her, filled with the relics of a past life. The antique clock on the wall ticked away the seconds, each sound echoing like a heartbeat. Lucy moved from room to room, feeling the weight of the house's history pressing down on her. In the living room, she found her father's favourite armchair, still bearing the imprint of his body. She paused, her fingers grazing the worn fabric, a pang of loss twisting her heart. As she moved upstairs to begin the real work of cleaning out the bedrooms, Lucy heard it, a soft murmur that seemed to drift through the walls. She froze, listening intently, but the sound faded into silence. Shaking off her unease, she pushed open the door to her parents' bedroom. It was just as they'd left it, the bed neatly made, her mother's robe hanging on the back of the door. Lucy felt a prickling at the back of her neck, a sensation of being watched. She turned quickly, her eyes scanning the room, but there was nothing, just the whispering shadows cast by the late afternoon sun. Lucy spent the next few days sorting through her parents' belongings, packing away memories with each box. The house felt alive, as if it were observing her every move, each creak of the floorboards and groan of the pipes a comment on her progress. At night, the murmurs returned, growing louder, forming words she couldn't quite understand. She lay in her childhood bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince herself that it was just her imagination. On the fourth day, a prospective buyer arrived, a man named Mr. Graves, with sharp features and an unsettlingly wide smile. He walked through the house with an air of familiarity that unnerved Lucy. As he inspected each room, he nodded as though greeting old friends, his fingers trailing along the walls as if he could feel the pulse of the place. "This house has a lot of character," Mr. Graves remarked, pausing in the hallway. His eyes met Lucy's, and she felt a shiver run down her spine. "It must hold many memories for you." Lucy nodded, unsure how to respond. She wanted to tell him about the voices, about the strange feeling that the house was trying to communicate, but something stopped her. Mr. Graves smiled as if he knew her thoughts and said, "I'll be in touch." After he left, the house seemed to grow quieter, as if holding its breath. Lucy felt a flicker of hope that perhaps she could move on, leave this place behind. But that night, the whispers returned, clearer and more insistent. She sat up in bed, straining to hear, and caught fragments of phrases, pleading, warning, a chorus of voices rising in urgency. Feeling compelled to investigate, Lucy followed the sound down the hallway to the attic door. She hesitated, her hand trembling on the doorknob. Taking a deep breath, she opened it and climbed the creaky stairs, the air growing colder with each step. The attic was filled with forgotten relics, old trunks, dusty furniture, and boxes of photographs. The murmurs surrounded her now, weaving through the air like a song. In the corner, she noticed a small, ornate mirror propped against the wall. As she approached, the voices crescendoed, and she caught sight of her reflection. But it wasn't her reflection. The face staring back at her was her mother's, eyes wide with fear and urgency. Lucy stumbled back, her heart racing, and the image flickered, morphing into her father, then a cascade of faces she didn't recognize. Each one seemed to speak directly to her, their mouths moving in silent screams. Lucy backed away, her mind reeling. The house wasn't just haunted, it was alive, a vessel for the spirits of those who had lived and died within its walls. And now it was trying to tell her something, a truth buried beneath years of silence. Desperate to escape, Lucy fled the attic, her footsteps echoing down the stairs. She reached the front door, but as she tried to open it, the handle wouldn't budge. The house seemed to tighten around her, the walls closing in like a vice. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, and Lucy realized with a jolt of terror that they were trying to protect her. The gas leak, the so-called accident that had claimed her parents' lives. It wasn't an accident at all. The house had known, had tried to warn them, but they hadn't listened. And now it was warning her. With renewed determination, Lucy rushed to the basement, the place where her father had spent countless hours tinkering. The air was thick with the scent of gasoline, and as she fumbled for the light switch, she saw the evidence: frayed wires, a jerry-rigged setup that could have easily sparked disaster. Her heart pounding, Lucy understood what she had to do. The house wasn't her enemy, it was her ally, her protector. It had been trying to save her all along. She quickly set to work, fixing the wiring, ensuring that the house could finally rest easy. As she finished, the oppressive weight lifted, the air clearing as if the house sighed in relief. The whispers faded, leaving only a gentle hum of gratitude. Lucy stood in the center of the basement, her hands trembling but her resolve strong. She knew she couldn't sell the house, not now that she understood its true nature. This was her home, her legacy, a place that had loved and protected her family for generations. With a deep breath, Lucy ascended the stairs, feeling the house settle around her like a warm embrace. She wouldn't be leaving after all. The house had other plans, and now so did she.
The Tumorling's Lament. In the hushed corridors of the hospital where the sterile smell of antiseptic clung to every surface, Ricardo Morales lay motionless on the thin, uncomfortable mattress. His breath was a laboured wheeze, the rhythmic rise and fall of his chest a testament to the tumour that had taken root within his lung. A mass of cells as relentless as time itself. Ricardo had been a painter once, vibrant and full of life, but the colours of his world had faded into dull greys and muted tones. The diagnosis had come as a cruel whisper, a malignant shadow that stole the light from his life. Now he was a man caught between the memories of what had been and the despair of what lay ahead. As the days bled into nights, Ricardo's body weakened. His wife, Lucia, a woman of fierce determination and gentle hands, remained by his side, her presence a comforting balm against the encroaching darkness. Together they clung to the remnants of their life, the love that had once burned so brightly now flickering like a candle in the wind. One stormy evening, as rain drummed against the window panes, Ricardo awoke with a start. He gasped, clutching his chest, eyes wide with panic. Lucia was instantly at his side, soothing him with her touch, but his gaze was fixed on something beyond the room, something only he could see. "The pain, it's alive," Ricardo wheezed, his voice barely a whisper. Lucia frowned, worry etched deep into her features, but she held him close, her heart aching with helplessness. That night, Ricardo's dreams were fevered and vivid, filled with surreal landscapes and nightmarish visions. He saw a creature birthed from his suffering, a twisted mass of flesh and bone that crawled from the shadows of his lungs. It was small, no larger than a child, with eyes that glowed like embers and a body that writhed with an unnatural life. Ricardo awoke, drenched in sweat, the creature's image seared into his mind. He could feel it within him, a living entity born of his illness, a monstrosity that fed on his pain. He tried to push the thought away, to bury it beneath layers of denial, but it clung to him with tenacity. As the weeks passed, Ricardo's health deteriorated rapidly. The tumour grew, and with it, the creature seemed to gain strength. It became a constant presence, whispering dark promises in the quiet of night, urging him to embrace the transformation. One evening, Lucia returned from work to find Ricardo sitting in his studio, a canvas before him. The room was filled with the familiar scent of turpentine and paint, but the colours he used were wrong, distorted and nightmarish. She watched, transfixed as he painted the creature, its form both repulsive and compelling. "Ricardo, what is this?" Lucia asked, her voice trembling with a mix of awe and fear. "It's the Tumorling," he replied, his eyes alight with a feverish intensity. "It's what I've become." Lucia recoiled, a shiver of dread creeping down her spine. She wanted to reach out to him, to pull him back from the brink, but the man she loved was slipping away, replaced by something otherworldly. In the days that followed, Ricardo grew increasingly obsessed with the creature. He spoke of it as if it were a separate entity, a part of him yet apart. It filled his thoughts, consuming him from the inside out. And Lucia watched helplessly as her husband vanished into the depths of his own mind. Then, one night, Ricardo awoke with a start, his body racked with convulsions. He cried out, a sound that was both human and inhuman, as if the tumorling was trying to claw its way free. Lucia rushed to his side, fear coursing through her veins. She held him as he trembled, feeling the unnatural movements beneath his skin, the entity that had entwined itself with his very being. "It's coming, Lucia," Ricardo gasped, his eyes wide and unseeing. "I can feel it." As the hours dragged on, Ricardo's condition worsened. He writhed in agony, his body a battleground for the creature within. Lucia called for help, her heart pounding with a desperate urgency, but she knew the battle was already lost. In the dim light of the hospital room, surrounded by the beeping of machines and the sterile scent of disinfectant, Ricardo took his final breath. Lucia held him close, her tears falling like rain, mourning the man he had been and the monster he had become. But in that moment, as his life slipped away, she felt a strange presence, a flicker of warmth, a gentle caress that seemed to emanate from the tumorling itself. It was as if the creature, born of his suffering and pain, carried a piece of Ricardo's soul with it, a reminder of the love and light that had once filled their lives. And then it was gone, leaving behind only silence and a canvas filled with haunting images, a testament to the man who had been both creator and creation. Lucia stood alone in the studio, the painting before her a reflection of her loss and grief. She reached out, her fingers brushing the surface of the canvas, and felt a strange connection, a bond that transcended the boundaries of life and death. In that moment, she understood that the tumorling was not merely a monster, but a manifestation of Ricardo's struggle, a creature born of his longing to hold on to life, to transform his suffering into something tangible. Lucia gathered the paintings, each one a piece of Ricardo's soul, and filled the studio with them. She surrounded herself with his work, his essence, allowing the tumorling's legacy to live on through the art he had created. As the days turned into weeks, Lucia found solace in the studio, a sanctuary filled with the whispers of the past and the echoes of the love she had shared with Ricardo. She painted alongside him, her brush strokes a tribute to the man who had touched her life so profoundly. And though the tumorling had taken Ricardo from her, it had also given her a gift, a reminder that even in the face of loss and monstrous transformation, love could endure, transcending the boundaries of life and death. In the heart of the studio, amidst the colours and canvases, Lucia found a way to keep Ricardo's spirit alive, to carry his memory forward in a world forever changed by his absence. And as she painted, she felt his presence beside her, a silent companion on the journey of healing and hope.
The screws that bind. There's a certain comfort in routine, a solace in the familiar cadence of day-to-day life. For the Thompsons, a family of 4 living in a modest 2-story house in the suburbs, weekends meant home improvement projects. It was a ritual, a chance for Michael and Jenna to bond over shared tasks while their 2 children, Dylan and Emma, played in the backyard. This weekend was no different, except it promised the added novelty of expert advice. Michael had discovered Handy Hank's Haven, a YouTube channel with over 1 million subscribers, known for its step-by-step guides on everything from plumbing to woodworking. The host, Hank, had an easygoing charm and a knack for making even the most complicated tasks seem simple. As they prepared to renovate the basement, Michael decided Hank's advice would be the guide they needed. "I'll handle the electrical work," Michael declared, holding up his tablet as Hank explained the basics of rewiring. Jenna watched skeptically, her hands full of paint swatches for the basement walls. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, glancing between the screen and her husband. "Maybe we should hire someone." Michael shook his head, grinning. "We've got this. Besides, it's about time we turned that basement into something more than a storage room." The basement had always been a place of forgotten things, the kind of space that seemed to swallow up items and leave them untouched for years. Dusty boxes and old furniture crowded its dim corners, and the air carried a musty scent that reminded Michael of his grandparents' attic. With Hank's guidance, it was supposed to transform into a cozy den. As Michael followed Hank's instructions, Jenna worked on preparing the walls for painting. She noticed an odd echo in the room, a resonance that made her stop and listen. The walls seemed to hum slightly, a low vibration she felt in her bones. Shrugging it off as imagination, she continued with her work. Meanwhile, Dylan and Emma played upstairs, their laughter occasionally filtering through the floorboards. But as Michael and Jenna delved deeper into their project, a subtle unease crept in. Michael found himself replaying Hank's videos multiple times, a creeping suspicion gnawing at him that something was off. Hank mentioned something about grounding wires, Michael muttered, rewinding the video for the third time, yet each replay revealed something different. The words seemed to shift, the instructions less clear with every iteration. "Did he say red or black?" Jenna asked, holding up 2 wires. "Red, I think. No, wait. Black, it has to be black." Michael rubbed his temples, a headache forming from the strain of concentration. The more they worked, the more the basement seemed to resist them. Tools disappeared, only to reappear in strange places. The air grew thick, oppressive, as if the room itself were watching, waiting. The hum in the walls intensified, a low, rhythmic pulse that matched the beat of their hearts. That night, after they'd called it quits, Michael lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Hank's videos played in his mind, snippets of advice looping endlessly, yet somehow never resolving into anything coherent. Jenna stirred beside him, mumbling in her sleep about paint and wires. The next morning, the unease persisted. Dylan and Emma seemed oblivious, their world unchanged, but Michael felt the house had shifted subtly. The rooms appeared darker, shadows pooling in corners where light had once banished them. Returning to the basement, Michael found Jenna staring at a newly revealed section of wall. The old plaster had crumbled away to reveal something unusual. A series of intricate symbols etched into the bricks. They pulsed faintly, a dull glow emanating from their lines. "What do you think it is?" Jenna asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Probably just some old graffiti," Michael replied, though his voice wavered with doubt. That evening, Michael turned to Hank's channel once more, but the man on the screen was different. His easy charm had morphed into something unsettling, his eyes dark and penetrating, as if he could see beyond the screen into the very room where Michael sat. "Remember, a good handyman knows how to listen," Hank said, his voice smooth yet edged with something sharp, something that cut deeper than mere sound. "The house will tell you what it needs. Just listen closely." As if on cue, the hum from the walls rose to a crescendo, a symphony of whispers that Michael could almost understand. He closed his eyes, straining to decipher the words woven into the vibrations. "Fix it, finish it, free us." When he opened his eyes, Hank was gone. The video paused on an empty frame. Heart pounding, Michael shut the tablet and stood, a sense of urgency propelling him back to the basement. Jenna was already there, staring at the symbols that now glowed with an undeniable intensity. Together, they felt compelled to continue the work, driven by a force they couldn't name. The walls seemed to breathe around them, each brushstroke and wire connection pulling them deeper into a rhythm beyond their own. As the night wore on, the basement transformed. The symbols on the wall thrummed with energy, casting eerie shadows that danced in time with the unseen heartbeat of the house. The Thompsons moved like puppets, guided by the strings of Hank's instructions echoing in their minds, and then, with one final turn of the screwdriver, silence fell. The house exhaled, the oppressive weight lifted, and the basement stood completed, a room both familiar and foreign. In the days that followed, Michael and Jenna tried to forget the ordeal. They avoided the basement, leaving it untouched, a place sealed off from their daily lives. But the house remembered. The hum remained, a constant reminder of the project that had bound them to something beyond understanding. On the rare occasions when they ventured downstairs, the symbols on the wall still glowed faintly, a testament to the secrets they'd unlocked. And though Hank's videos no longer played, his voice lingered, a ghost in the wires, whispering promises of things unseen. In the end, the Thompsons learned that some projects should remain unfinished, that some doors once opened can never truly be closed. and in the quiet moments of the night when the world was still and the air was thick with dreams, they could almost hear the house speaking, its words a song only they could hear, a melody that promised both salvation and despair, bound by the screws that held them in place.
The resurgence of Midnight Creek. Catherine Evans never imagined she'd find herself returning to Midnight Creek, a town she had left behind with the remnants of her childhood fears. Yet here she was, drawn back by a letter from a lawyer she'd never met, informing her that she was the sole inheritor of the estate of her late uncle, a man she barely remembered. The sun dipped below the horizon as Catherine drove past the familiar twisted trees lining the road, their gnarled branches casting eerie silhouettes against the twilight sky. Midnight Creek had always felt isolated, cocooned in its own shadowy past. Her heart pounded with every mile as she approached the old family mansion, which stood like a sentinel at the end of the road waiting for her. The mansion was exactly as she remembered, imposing with its Victorian architecture and a garden overgrown with weeds and creeping ivy. As she stepped out of the car, the evening air chilled her skin, a stark reminder of how the town had always felt to her, cold and unwelcoming. She took a deep breath and approached the front door, her footsteps echoing on the creaky wooden porch. Inside, the house was filled with the scent of dust and decay. The furniture was shrouded in white sheets, resembling ghosts in the dim light. Catherine felt a shiver run down her spine, an uneasy feeling that seemed to settle in her bones. She wandered through the rooms, her fingers trailing along the dusty surfaces, each room a tableau of the past. It was as if the house itself had been waiting for her return. She was jolted from her thoughts by a sudden sound, a thud coming from the basement. Her heart skipped a beat. She hesitated, considering her options. Finally, mustering her courage, she made her way toward the basement door, each step a deliberate act of will. The door creaked ominously as she opened it, revealing a dark stairwell descending into blackness. With her phone flashlight guiding her, Catherine descended the stairs. The basement was cluttered with old furniture, boxes of forgotten belongings, and, curiously, a series of bookshelves, each lined with dusty tomes and jars filled with strange, unidentifiable substances. Her curiosity piqued. She moved closer to inspect the contents. A sudden movement caught her eye. Something shifted in the corner of the room and Catherine's blood ran cold. Her heart pounded as she focused the beam of light on the source of the movement. There, emerging from the shadows, was a figure she recognized all too well. Jacob Hawthorne, the town's notorious serial killer from decades ago. He had been executed when Catherine was just a child, his deeds having left a scar on the community. Catherine stumbled back, her mind reeling. This couldn't be possible. Jacob was dead. She had heard the stories, the hushed whispers that spoke of his dark deeds, yet here he was, as tangible as the fear that gripped her. His eyes locked onto hers and a cruel smile twisted his lips. Before she could react, another figure emerged from the darkness, followed by another and another. They were the reanimated corpses of Jacob's victims, their eyes hollow and lifeless, their movements jerky and unnatural. Catherine's mind screamed in terror as the reality of her situation sank in. She was trapped in the basement with the undead. In a panic, she scrambled back up the stairs, slamming the door shut behind her. Her heart raced as she locked the door, her mind racing for a way to escape the nightmare that had descended upon her. She could hear the relentless scratching and thudding against the door, a cacophony of dread that echoed through the house. Desperate for answers, Catherine rifled through the papers left by her uncle, hoping to find some clue to explain the horrors she had witnessed. Amidst the documents, she found a journal, its pages filled with cryptic notes and diagrams. The writing detailed an obsession with necromancy, an attempt to resurrect the dead and control them. Her uncle had been dabbling in dark arts, and now she was reaping the consequences. The scratching at the door intensified, the undead driven by an insatiable hunger for life. Catherine knew she had to act quickly if she was to survive. She remembered the stories of how Jacob had been lured to his death, how the townspeople had used fire to end his reign of terror. Perhaps that was the key to stopping him once again. She rushed to the kitchen, grabbing matches and a bottle of kerosene from under the sink. Her hands trembled as she prepared to set the basement ablaze, hoping the fire would consume the horrors within. The weight of the past pressed down on her, memories of a frightened child haunted by tales of a monster lurking in the night. With steely resolve, Catherine returned to the basement door, her heart pounding in her chest. She poured the kerosene through the gap under the door, striking a match and tossing it onto the liquid. Flames erupted, licking hungrily at the wood, the heat intense and immediate. The door buckled under the assault, and Catherine stepped back, watching as the fire spread, devouring everything in its path. The house groaned under the strain of the blaze, the walls crackling and popping as the flames consumed them. Catherine retreated, stumbling out into the night, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Behind her, the mansion was engulfed in flames, a blazing beacon of destruction that lit up the night sky. As she stood watching the inferno, Catherine felt a sense of liberation. The weight of fear and dread lifted from her shoulders. The undead would be reduced to ashes, and with them the dark legacy of Jacob Hawthorne and her uncle's forbidden experiments. The fire raged on, a purifying force that cleansed the taint of Midnight Creek. Yet even as the flames roared, Catherine couldn't shake the feeling that this was not the end. Evil, she knew, had a way of lingering, of finding new forms to inhabit. But for now, she was free. She turned away from the burning mansion, leaving behind the ghosts of the past and stepping into a future unburdened by the horrors that had once held her captive. Midnight Creek would forever bear the scars of its history, but Catherine Evans was determined to forge a new path, one that led away from darkness and into the light.
The Reflections in Glass. In the small coastal town of Ashford, Maine, where the sea perpetually kissed the rocky shore, renowned horror author Thomas Blackwood found himself confronting his own ghost. He'd come back to the house he'd inherited, nestled at the edge of the world to find inspiration for his next novel, a story that had haunted him since he was a child. The Dagger Man, they called him, a legend, a myth, a nightmare that had prowled the alleys of Ashford decades ago. As a boy, Thomas had been fascinated by the tales of the elusive serial killer who vanished without a trace, leaving behind only whispers of horror and blood. It was said that the Dagger Man was more than a man, perhaps a creature of darkness, whose presence was marked by the smell of salt and metal and the chill of fog-laden nights. Thomas settled into the creaking old house, its wooden floors groaning under his weight. Each room was filled with the musty scent of memories and forgotten years. He sat at his desk by the window, overlooking the tumultuous sea, and began to write, but as he filled page after page, he felt the insidious grip of doubt clawing at his mind. Was he writing the story, or was the story writing him? The line between reality and fiction blurred as Thomas delved deeper into the world of the Dagger Man. He wrote of a young boy who'd once stumbled upon a murder, hidden behind the eyes of a man he could never forget. The boy had seen something, a fleeting glimpse of the killer's face reflected in a shattered mirror, a face that still haunted his dreams. As Thomas wrote, strange things began to happen. At night he heard footsteps echoing through the empty halls, shadows stretched unnaturally long across the floors, and the wind carried whispers that seemed to speak his name. He convinced himself it was the house settling, the echoes of the past reverberating through time. One evening, as the fog rolled in from the sea, Thomas decided to take a walk along the cliffs. The air was thick with moisture, and the scent of salt mingled with the damp earth. He hoped the bracing wind would clear his mind, which felt like it was teetering on the brink of madness. He stopped at a familiar spot, an old oak tree that leaned precariously over the edge of the cliff. As a child, he'd come here often, seeking solace in its shade. But now, the tree loomed over him, its gnarled branches like fingers reaching out to drag him into the depths below. It was then he saw it, something glinting in the grass. A dagger, its blade rusty and weathered by time, lay half buried in the dirt. Thomas's heart raced as he knelt to pick it up. The hilt was engraved with a symbol he recognized from his research, the mark of the Dagger Man. His pulse quickened. It couldn't be a coincidence. It was as if the story was bleeding into reality. As he turned the dagger over in his hands, he caught a flicker of movement out of the corner of his eye. A figure stood at the edge of the woods, obscured by mist and shadow. Thomas squinted, trying to discern who or what it was, but the figure vanished, leaving him alone with the wind and the whispering sea. The incident left Thomas unnerved, yet exhilarated. He returned to the house, the dagger tucked into his coat pocket, and resumed his writing with renewed vigor. The words flowed from him as if he were possessed, the story taking shape in ways he'd never imagined. He wrote of a writer unraveling the mystery of the Dagger Man, only to discover the killer was closer than he ever realized. Days turned into nights, and Thomas lost himself in his work, driven by an obsession that bordered on mania. He scarcely ate or slept, consumed by the narrative that had taken hold of him. But with each word he wrote, the world around him seemed to unravel, the boundaries between fiction and reality dissolved, and Thomas felt himself slipping into the story he'd created. One stormy night, as lightning danced across the sky, Thomas reached the climax of his tale. The protagonist, a writer much like himself, faced the Dagger Man in a confrontation that would reveal the truth. But as he typed the final words, Thomas heard a noise that froze his blood, a slow, deliberate creak from the hallway. He rose from his desk, heart pounding, and crept toward the sound. The house was dark, the power flickering as the storm raged outside. In the dim light, he saw the outline of a figure standing at the end of the hall. It was him, the Dagger Man, the face from the mirror, the spectre from his childhood. He was real. The figure moved toward him, the shadows peeling away to reveal features etched in terror. Thomas staggered back, his mind struggling to comprehend the impossible. The Dagger Man smiled, a knowing, twisted grin, and raised a hand to reveal the rusty dagger, Thomas's dagger. "Welcome home," the figure whispered, its voice a serpentine hiss that wrapped around his throat. In that moment, Thomas understood. He had summoned the Dagger Man from the depths of his mind, conjured him with his words and fears. The writer had become the written, trapped in a narrative he could no longer control. As the Dagger Man advanced, Thomas felt a chilling realization. He had become a character in his own story, a puppet dancing to the strings of fate. The final twist, the ultimate horror. He was the Dagger Man. The killer he'd feared and loathed was a reflection of himself, a manifestation of the darkness that had always lurked within. In the heart of the storm, the house echoed with a scream that was both Thomas's and not. The words he'd written, the story he'd told, consumed him whole, leaving only the whispers of the sea and the relentless fury of the storm. And in the town of Ashford, the legend of the Dagger Man lived on, a tale told by the wind and the waves, a story without end.
The veil between worlds. The night sky over New York City was a dark, starless canvas. Streetlights flickered as if they struggled against an unseen wind. In the heart of the city, 5 friends gathered at a bar in Greenwich Village, their chatter rising above the clatter of glasses and the distant hum of traffic. There was Sam, a wiry guitarist with a penchant for conspiracy theories. Jenna, an artist with eyes that seemed to see beyond the mundane. Mike, a tech wizard with an ever-present laptop. Lena, a skeptic who relished in debunking myths. And Alex, the group's unofficial leader, always seeking the next thrill. The conversation turned to the rumors that had been circulating among their friends. Strange sightings in the subway, odd occurrences in the old neighborhoods, whispers of something lurking beneath the city. Sam leaned forward, eyes gleaming with excitement. "I'm telling you, there's something going on. People have been disappearing and no one's talking about it." "Disappearances happen all the time," Lena countered, swirling her drink. "It's New York. People leave, move, or just want to get lost." "But not like this," Jenna interjected, her voice a hushed whisper. "There's something different about it. I can feel it in the air." Mike tapped away on his laptop, pulling up a map of the city. "I've been tracking some of the reports. Most of the strange activities are happening around certain subway lines, the A train in particular." Alex looked at each of them, weighing the excitement against the potential danger. "All right, why don't we check it out? See if we can find anything unusual." They descended into the subway, the air heavy with the scent of oil and metal. The station was eerily empty, a stark contrast to the usual bustle of commuters. As they waited on the platform, the sound of distant train whistles echoed through the tunnels, like the moans of something ancient and forgotten. The A train arrived, its windows dark and uninviting. The friends exchanged wary glances but boarded nonetheless, the thrill of adventure propelling them forward. As the train moved through the tunnels, the lights flickered, casting long shadows that seemed to dance and shift of their own accord. Jenna shivered, hugging herself. It feels like the city is alive, watching us. Sam nodded, his voice a conspiratorial whisper. The city has secrets. It's like a living entity, with a heart that beats in time with the trains. The train screeched to a halt at an abandoned station, its walls covered in graffiti that seemed to writhe under the dim light. The friends disembarked, stepping into the forgotten space. The air was thick with a sense of anticipation, as if the station itself held its breath. Alex led them forward, flashlight cutting through the darkness. As they explored, they discovered a series of tunnels branching off into the unknown. The walls were adorned with strange symbols, glowing faintly in the darkness. Looks like some sort of ritualistic markings, Mike observed, snapping photos with his phone. Lena scoffed, though her voice trembled slightly. Probably just some bored kids with too much time on their hands. As they ventured deeper, the air grew colder, and an oppressive silence fell over them. Suddenly, a low rumble reverberated through the tunnels, and the ground shook beneath their feet. "What was that?" Jenna gasped, clutching Sam's arm. "Whatever it is, it's getting closer," Alex warned, urging them to move. They ran through the labyrinthine tunnels, the sound of pursuit echoing behind them. The walls seemed to close in, the darkness pressing against their senses. As they rounded a corner, they stumbled into a vast underground chamber. The chamber was dominated by a massive stone altar, surrounded by flickering candles. Figures in dark robes stood in a circle, chanting in a language that was both alien and familiar. Their voices rose and fell, a haunting melody that resonated within the bones of the city. At the center of the altar lay a shimmering veil, pulsating with an otherworldly light. It was a portal, a gateway to realms beyond comprehension. The air crackled with energy, and the friends felt the pull of the unknown. "We need to get out of here," Lena urged, her skepticism dissolving in the face of undeniable reality. But before they could retreat, the robed figures turned towards them, faces hidden beneath shadowed hoods. One stepped forward, an unseen gaze fixing upon them. "You should not have come here," the figure intoned, voice like gravel and thunder. "The city has secrets meant to remain hidden." Sam, fueled by curiosity and fear, stepped forward. "What are you doing? What's behind the veil?" The figure's laughter was a chilling echo reverberating through the chamber. "The veil separates our world from theirs. We seek to open it, to let them through." Jenna shuddered, feeling the weight of their gaze. "Them? Entities beyond your understanding," the figure replied. "Beings that hunger for the life force of this city." Realization dawned on the friends, the true nature of the disappearances becoming horrifyingly clear. Alex stepped forward, resolve hardening. "We can't let you do this." The figure's laughter grew louder, joined by the others, a cacophony of madness. "You cannot stop what is already in motion." The chamber shuddered, the veil rippling as if alive. A blinding light burst forth, engulfing the room. The friends shielded their eyes, feeling the world tilt and twist around them. When the light faded, they found themselves back in the subway station. The chamber and its occupants vanished as if they had never been. The air was still, the city above oblivious to the events that had transpired below. Breathless and shaken, the friends exchanged glances, the reality of their encounter settling over them. They had glimpsed a world beyond their own, a reality where forces beyond comprehension lurked beneath the surface of their familiar city. As they emerged into the night, the city's lights twinkled with an unsettling brightness, the streets alive with secrets waiting to be uncovered. The veil between worlds had thinned, and they knew that their lives would never be the same. In the heart of New York City, the ancient heartbeat of the city continued its rhythmic thrum, a reminder of the mysteries that lay beneath, waiting to be discovered by those brave enough to seek them out.
Harvest of the Crimson Orchard. It started as a whisper in the town of Redfall, a place nestled in the folds of forgotten mountains. The rumors trickled down from the northern hills, where an ancient orchard lay hidden from prying eyes and curious souls. Those who dared to venture into its depths returned with tales of apples unlike any seen before, deep crimson, almost black, with a skin that seemed to shimmer under the moonlight. The first taste was like a drug, a promise of all things sweet and forbidden. Those who bit into the fruit described a rush of memories and emotions, vivid and intoxicating. For some, it was the laughter of a long-lost love. For others, the triumph of a forgotten success. But what they all shared was an insatiable hunger for more, a craving that dug into their souls like the roots of the trees themselves. As summer bled into autumn, the orchard's influence seeped into Redfall. The townsfolk, drawn by an unseen force, made the pilgrimage to the orchard. Men and women, young and old, found themselves entranced by the scent of the apples which lingered in the air like a siren's song. Jack Grady was the first to notice the change. A farmer by trade, Jack had spent his life working the land, tending to the soil with the care of a devoted steward. He knew the rhythm of the seasons, the song of the earth beneath his feet, but the orchard was different. Its soil was dark and rich, almost unnaturally so, and the trees seemed to pulse with a life of their own. His wife, Mary, had brought home a basket of the apples one evening. "Gift from the orchard," she said, her eyes glazed with an unnatural light. Jack watched as she bit into one, her expression a mixture of bliss and fear. That night, Jack dreamt of the orchard. He walked among the trees, the air heavy with the scent of apples and something else, something ancient and malevolent. As he reached for a fruit, the ground shifted beneath him, and he fell into darkness. The dreams came every night after that. The townsfolk spoke of similar visions, each one more vivid than the last. Some began to act strangely, their behaviors erratic and unpredictable. The town's pastor, Father O'Leary, was found wandering the streets, muttering prayers and curses to an unseen audience. Jack realized that the orchard was not a blessing but a curse. It fed on their desires, their weaknesses, turning them into puppets dancing on invisible strings. He resolved to confront the orchard, to understand the force that held his town in its grip. The night of the harvest moon, Jack set out for the orchard, the path illuminated by the pale glow of the moon. As he entered the grove, the air was thick with an otherworldly energy, a hum that vibrated through his bones. The trees loomed around him, their branches twisting and turning in a macabre dance. In the heart of the orchard stood a figure cloaked in shadow, its form shifting like smoke. Jack felt the weight of its gaze, ancient and hungry. "You've come to taste the fruit," the figure said, its voice a blend of whispers and screams. "No," Jack replied, his voice steady despite the fear curling in his gut. "I've come to end this." The figure laughed, a sound like rustling leaves and breaking bones. "You cannot end what was never begun. This is the cycle, the harvest of souls." Jack knew then what he had to do. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small knife, its blade glinting in the moonlight. With a swift motion, he sliced into the flesh of an apple, the juice running down his fingers like blood. As the fruit fell to the ground, a tremor ran through the orchard. The trees shuddered, their branches clawing at the sky. The figure recoiled, its form unraveling like smoke in the wind. "You are but one," it hissed, its voice fading. "The harvest will come again." Jack watched as the figure dissipated, the air growing still and cold. The orchard, once vibrant and alive, now stood silent and somber, its power broken. He knew the town would recover, but the memory of the orchard would linger, a reminder of the darkness that lurked beneath the surface. In the days that followed, the people of Redfall began to return to their senses, the hold of the orchard slowly fading. They spoke of their experiences in hushed tones, reluctant to revisit the terror that had gripped their lives. Mary, her eyes clear and bright once more, thanked Jack for his courage. But Jack knew it was not courage that had saved them, but desperation, a desperate need to protect those he loved from forces beyond their understanding. As winter settled over Redfall, the orchard lay dormant, its trees bare and brittle, but Jack knew it would not remain so. The cycle would begin anew, the ancient forces waiting for their time to harvest once more. But for now, the town was safe, and the memories of the orchard's dark allure would fade with the seasons. Jack hoped that when the time came they would be ready, prepared to face the darkness with eyes wide open and hearts steeled against the seductive pull of the crimson fruit. And so the orchard waited, a slumbering beast in the heart of Redfall, its roots deep and its branches reaching toward a future only it could see.
The wounds of Sable House. Anna and James stood at the edge of the overgrown driveway, staring at the looming presence of Sable House. Its windows were like empty eye sockets, watching them with a mix of malice and mirth. They had not spoken much during the drive upstate, each lost in their own thoughts. The house was a spectre from their past, a dilapidated memory that refused to fade. It had been 5 years since they had last seen it, and now, under a sky heavy with impending rain, they had returned. "Why are we doing this again?" James asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The question hung in the air, unanswered, as Anna took the first step forward. The crunch of gravel under her feet was the only response, and James followed her reluctantly. Anna had insisted on coming back, driven by a compulsion she couldn't quite articulate. The house had called to her in dreams, its walls whispering secrets and promises that seemed real in the dark of night. James had agreed to join her, perhaps out of a sense of unfinished business, or perhaps because he could never say no to her. The wounds of their relationship had never fully healed, and now they were here hoping to find closure or absolution within the walls of the crumbling estate. As they approached the front door, Anna paused, her hand hovering over the tarnished doorknob. Memories of their last visit flooded back, laughter, arguments, and the sharp sting of betrayal. She glanced at James, who gave her a slight nod. Together they pushed open the door, and it groaned in protest. The air inside was stale, thick with the scent of mildew and decay. Dust motes danced in the weak light filtering through the cracked windows. They stepped inside, the floorboards creaking beneath their weight, and the door swung shut behind them with a decisive thud. "Feels like the house is glad to see us," James muttered, his attempt at humour falling flat. Anna ignored him, her attention drawn to the hallway ahead. The wallpaper, once vibrant, now peeled away in strips, revealing the bare plaster beneath. She moved forward, her footsteps echoing in the silence. Every creak, every sigh of the house seemed amplified, a living thing waiting to pounce. They reached the parlour, its furniture shrouded in dust-covered sheets. Anna paused at the fireplace, running her fingers along the mantel. She turned to find James staring at a portrait hanging above it, a faded painting of the house but with subtle differences. In the painting, the windows glowed with an unnatural light, and shadows twisted in impossible shapes. "Do you remember?" Anna asked, her voice barely audible. James nodded. "The stories, the ones about the house showing you what it wants you to see." They had laughed at those stories once, dismissing them as mere superstition. But now, standing in the haunted stillness, Anna felt the weight of those tales pressing down on her. As they moved through the house, it seemed to shift around them. Corridors stretched longer than they remembered, rooms appeared where there had been none before. Anna felt the house watching, its gaze unrelenting and intrusive. They entered what had once been the dining room, only to find themselves staring at their own reflections. Anna gasped, stepping back as her doppelganger mirrored her every move. James's reflection stood beside her, eyes empty and cold. "This isn't possible," James said, his voice trembling. "No." Anna reached out, her fingertips brushing the surface of the mirror. Her reflection smirked, a twisted version of her own face. Panic surged through her and she pulled back, stumbling into James. "We need to leave," Anna said, her voice shaking. But the house had other plans. The doors slammed shut and the room grew colder. The reflection stepped forward, stepping out of the glass with deliberate malice. Anna and James backed away, but there was nowhere to go. The doppelgangers advanced, their movements fluid and unnatural. Anna's double reached out, fingers brushing against her cheek. It leaned in, whispering in her ear with a voice like crushed glass. "They'll never forgive you," it hissed. "Not after what you did." James's double echoed the sentiment, its voice dripping with venom. "You left them to die, and now you're back to finish the job." The words cut deep, reopening old wounds that had never truly healed. Anna felt a cold rage bubbling up inside her, a defiance that burned bright against the encroaching darkness. "This isn't real," she said, more to herself than to the spectres. "You're not real." But the doppelgangers only laughed, a sound like breaking glass, and lunged at them. Anna and James fought back, their struggle clumsy and desperate. The room seemed to shift around them, walls closing in, floor tilting underfoot. It was as if the house itself was trying to swallow them whole. Anna swung wildly, her fists connecting with her doppelganger. The impact jarred her, but the figure dissipated like smoke, reforming moments later. Beside her, James grappled with his double, their movements a chaotic dance of survival. "Anna," James shouted, his voice barely audible over the cacophony. "We need to find a way out." Anna nodded, adrenaline and fear coursing through her veins. They fought their way to the door, the doppelgangers snapping at their heels. Anna grasped the handle, praying it would open, and yanked it hard. The door flew open and they stumbled into the hallway. The house roared in fury, the walls trembling as they raced toward the front entrance. Their footsteps pounded against the floor, the house's rage chasing them down the corridor. They burst through the front door, collapsing onto the porch as the storm broke overhead. Rain poured down in sheets, soaking them to the bone. Behind them, the house loomed, its presence still oppressive and malevolent. Anna and James lay there, gasping for breath, the rain washing away the grime and fear. They were free, but the wounds Sable House had opened would take time to heal. As they stood, Anna glanced back at the house. It watched them with its empty windows, a promise and a threat wrapped in one. She turned away, taking James's hand, and together they walked into the storm, leaving the house and their ghost behind.
The haunting of Eleanor Gray. Eleanor Gray used to be a name that resonated with kindness. Her small floral shop on the corner of Bell Street was known for its vibrant bouquets and personalized touches. But life has a way of wilting even the most beautiful blooms. When Eleanor's mother fell ill, her world began to crumble. The shop's sales dwindled as she spent more time at the hospital, watching her mother's once lively eyes turn dull and distant. In the end, Eleanor lost her mother, her last tether to sanity. The funeral was sparsely attended. Her mother had outlived most of her friends, and Eleanor's own circle had shrunk to nearly nothing. She was left alone to grapple with grief, anger, and a gnawing sense of betrayal by the universe. Those she considered friends had vanished, leaving her to navigate the darkness alone. Her despair festered, growing into a raw, festering wound that pulsed with every beat of her heart. The floral shop, once her sanctuary, now felt like a prison. Petals turned to ash in her hands, and the scent of roses morphed into a cloying reminder of loss. Eleanor was spiraling, untethered, with nothing but the bitter seed of revenge to keep her afloat. It started small, a snide comment about the old landlord who had raised her rent, whispered under her breath. But Eleanor found power in those words. Soon her whispers turned into incantations, fueled by resentment and anger. She would sit in her darkened shop after closing, surrounded by wilting flowers and flickering candles, and pour her malice into the universe. Her first target was Derek, a former friend who had been conspicuously absent during her mother's illness. Derek, who had promised to visit, who had promised to help, and then disappeared. She focused her mind on him, envisioning his handsome face twisting with fear, his confident stride faltering. Eleanor spoke words she had never known, felt a chill she had never felt. The next day, she heard about Derek's accident. He had been crossing the street when a car careened out of control, hitting him head-on. He survived, but was left with a limp and a haunted look in his eyes. Eleanor felt a thrill of vindication. Her whispers had taken root, and for the first time in months, she felt alive. Emboldened, Eleanor expanded her dark rituals. She scrawled names on scraps of paper, each one a reminder of a slight or betrayal. Each name was a person who had wronged her, abandoned her, or scorned her in her time of need. She poured herself into her curses, each syllable dripping with venom. Emily, the gossipy neighbor who had spread rumors about Eleanor's mental state, was next. Eleanor envisioned Emily's smooth, flawless skin marred by rashes, her voice reduced to a rasping whisper. It was only a week later that Emily was seen, scratching at red welts that covered her arms, her voice hoarse and broken. The power was intoxicating. Eleanor felt herself becoming something else, something more than the grieving, broken woman she had been. She was reborn in the flames of her own vengeance, a phoenix rising from the ashes of her despair, but power comes at a cost, and the price was a darkness that began to creep into Eleanor's soul. Her dreams were plagued by nightmarish visions of her own making, shadows twisting into grotesque forms, whispering her name in a sinister chorus. The line between reality and nightmare blurred, and Eleanor found herself trapped in a waking dream, a puppet of her own creation. Despite the mounting terror, she pressed on, her lust for retribution consuming her. It wasn't enough to just hurt those who had wronged her. She wanted them to suffer, to feel the same hopelessness and despair that had once crushed her. Her curses grew more elaborate, her rituals more elaborate and unhinged. She stopped caring about her shop, about her own well-being. Revenge was her only sustenance. Her final target was James, the man who had promised her forever and then vanished without a trace. James, who had held her heart in his hands and then shattered it, leaving her to pick up the pieces. Eleanor devoted every ounce of her remaining energy to cursing him, visualizing him crumbling under the weight of his own guilt and fear. Days turned into weeks, and Eleanor waited for news of James's downfall. But the news never came. Her magic, her power seemed to falter. Frustrated and desperate, she pushed herself further, delving deeper into the darkness that had ensnared her. Then one stormy night, as lightning split the sky and thunder rattled the windows, James appeared at her doorstep. He looked older, wearier, but his eyes were as kind as she remembered. He told her of the guilt that had driven him away, of his regrets, and his desire to make amends. Eleanor was taken aback, the fire of her vengeance flickering uncertainly. She saw in him a reflection of her own pain and anger, and for a moment she hesitated. But the darkness within her was insatiable, a beast that would not be tamed. She invited him in, her heart pounding with a mixture of rage and confusion. As he stepped across the threshold, the candles flickered ominously, casting jagged shadows across the walls. Eleanor felt the magic surge within her, fueled by her hatred and her heartbreak. But as she looked into James's eyes, something within her broke. The darkness that had sustained her began to unravel, leaving her hollow and lost. She saw in him not an enemy but a kindred spirit, broken and adrift in a world that had betrayed them both. In that moment of vulnerability, Eleanor realized the futility of her revenge. Her power had not healed her, had not filled the void left by her mother's death. It had only deepened her pain, isolating her from the world she had once loved. With a final, anguished cry, Eleanor released her grip on the darkness, letting it dissipate into the ether. The candles sputtered out, leaving her and James in the dim light of the storm. She felt the weight of her actions settle over her like a shroud, and she wept, her tears mingling with the rain that battered against the windows. James held her as she cried, offering the solace she had denied herself for so long. In his embrace, Eleanor felt the first stirrings of forgiveness, not just for James, but for herself. She had been lost in a sea of despair, but now she saw a glimmer of hope, a chance to find her way back to the light. In the end, Eleanor Gray's story was not one of revenge, but of redemption. The darkness had been a part of her, but it did not define her. She had been consumed by her own grief, but she had also found the strength to let go, and in doing so she discovered the power of forgiveness, a power far greater than any curse she could conjure. As the storm passed and the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, Eleanor stood at the window watching the world awaken. She knew that the road to healing would be long and difficult, but she was no longer alone. And for the first time in a long time, she felt the stirrings of hope in her heart, a promise of brighter days to come.
A tide of madness. The waves crashed against the rotting hull of the ship, a derelict carcass adrift on a sea of stars and sludge. The mermaid clung to the wood, her tail shimmering with an oily sheen beneath the pallid light of a waning moon. She watched as the land loomed closer, a jagged silhouette on the horizon fractured and decayed. Beside her stood the plague doctor, a stoic figure clad in leather and beak, a spectre from another time. The mask's hollow eyes surveyed the wasteland with impassive scrutiny, while the satchel at his side rattled with vials of tinctures and poisons, each one a promise of hope or despair. "We make landfall," the plague doctor intoned, his voice muffled by the mask, yet carrying a resonance that spoke of age and authority. This place reeks of entropy. Be wary lest it consumes you. The mermaid nodded, her eyes narrowing as she studied the land. It was a place of ash and ruin, where trees stood like skeletons and the air shimmered with an unnatural heat. She could feel the pull of the ocean behind her, a siren call that promised safety and oblivion. But she resisted, drawn forward by a purpose that was as elusive as it was compelling. As they stepped onto the shore, the ground squelched beneath their feet, releasing a fetid miasma that coiled around them like a living thing. The mermaid felt a shiver pass through her, a ripple of unease that set her scales on edge. Her senses were acute, tuned to the vibrations of the world around her, and what she felt here was a discordant symphony of madness and decay. They moved through the desolation, the plague doctor's staff tapping a rhythm against the earth, a heartbeat in the silence. The landscape was a twisted mockery of life, where plants writhed with parasitic intent and shadows slithered with unseen malice. "Do you see them?" the plague doctor asked, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The mermaid nodded. "They linger at the edge of perception, mocking our reason." They were the others, alien horrors that defied comprehension. Their forms were ever-shifting, amorphous shapes that danced on the periphery of sight, taunting with glimpses of what lay beyond understanding. To look upon them was to court madness, to invite the fracturing of the self. As they travelled, the world grew stranger, a kaleidoscope of colours and sensations that defied logic. Time stretched and contracted, each step a journey through eternity. The mermaid felt the boundaries of her mind begin to blur, the edges fraying like a tapestry unravelling. The plague doctor sensed it too. "Hold fast," he urged, his voice a lifeline in the chaos. "We must not lose ourselves here." They pressed on, their path weaving through a labyrinth of impossible geometries and shifting realities. The land was alive, a breathing entity that watched and waited, a predator biding its time. In the heart of this madness, they found a village, a relic of humanity clinging to existence. The houses were crooked, their windows staring like vacant eyes. The streets were deserted, yet the air buzzed with an undercurrent of whispers, a cacophony of voices that rose and fell like the tide. The mermaid felt the weight of their gaze, 1,000 unseen eyes burrowing into her soul. She shuddered, drawing closer to the plague doctor, seeking solace in his presence. "They know we are here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The plague doctor nodded. "This place is a trap, a snare for the unwary. But there is knowledge here, secrets that we must uncover." They entered the village, moving through the empty streets like phantoms. The mermaid could feel the pulse of the place, a rhythm that thrummed beneath the surface, a heartbeat that matched her own. It was a song of despair, a lament for a world lost to madness. In the centre of the village, they found the source of the song, a fountain of black stone that bubbled with liquid darkness. It was a wellspring of corruption, a nexus of alien power that pulsed with a malignant energy. The mermaid approached it cautiously, her instincts screaming at her to flee, to return to the safety of the sea. But she resisted, drawn by a compulsion she could not name. "This is the heart of the madness," the plague doctor said, his voice reverent and fearful. "It is a portal, a doorway to the realm of the others." As they stood before it, the air shimmered and parted, revealing a figure of indescribable horror. It was a being of light and shadow, a tapestry of colours that defied comprehension. Its eyes were voids, endless and all-consuming, and its voice was a symphony of despair. "Why have you come?" the being asked, its words resonating in their minds, bypassing the limitations of speech. "We seek understanding," the plague doctor replied, his tone unwavering. "We seek a way to end this madness." The being laughed, a sound like shattering glass. "There is no end, no salvation, only the eternal cycle of creation and destruction. You are but fragments, fleeting and inconsequential." The mermaid felt the weight of its words, a crushing despair that threatened to drown her. She looked to the plague doctor, seeking strength in his resolve. "We are more than fragments," he said, his voice rising with defiance. We are the sum of our choices, the architects of our destiny. The being regarded them with something akin to amusement, its form shifting and fracturing like a broken mirror. Then show me your strength, prove your worth. The air crackled with energy and the world around them twisted into a vortex of chaos. The mermaid felt herself pulled into the maelstrom, her mind unraveling in a cascade of memories and fears. She clung to the plague doctor, her anchor in the storm, and together they faced the madness. In that moment, something within the mermaid awoke, a spark of defiance that flared into brilliance. She reached out with her mind, touching the heart of the being, and she saw it for what it truly was, a reflection of their fears, a mirror of their darkest selves. With a cry of defiance, she shattered the illusion, tearing apart the fabric of the nightmare. The world exploded into light, and when the brilliance faded, they stood once more on the shore of the wasteland, the village and the horrors banished to the realm of dreams. The plague doctor regarded her with newfound respect, his eyes glinting behind the mask. You have the strength of the sea within you, he said. Together, we can face whatever lies ahead. The mermaid nodded, her heart filled with hope and determination. They turned their backs to the sea, stepping forward into the unknown, bound by a shared purpose and a defiance that would not be broken. The landscape stretched before them, a tapestry of desolation and possibility, and they walked into it together, ready to face whatever lay beyond the horizon.
Thank you for watching, and remember, the darkness awaits. Until our paths cross again, stay fearful and stay subscribed.